Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with my thoughts on the Diablo 4 beta. The beta is wrapping up, and now we've seen all 5 classes in action, and we can kind of tell how strong each one of them is, and we're getting a better and better understanding of what the game is going to be like at launch. I personally mainly played Barb and Druid over the 2 weekends, but I did see the other classes in action, and I did research to understand their mechanics, just to gauge what they look like and how they play out, and whether I want to play them when D4 launches. I also mainly played Barb in D3, so this video will have a slightly heavier focus on Barb. I also get most enjoyment out of optimizing late game builds and late game content, so I'll try my best to extrapolate where this game is heading with endgame, because with the D4 beta, we just got a sense of the first 25 levels. We don't really know what endgame is going to look like. So I'll try my best to forecast things, but, we have limited information, so a lot of it is guesswork. Guesstimates, you might say. And then you can also see that there have already been tons of other reviews about the game. So I will try to avoid beating dead horses and just pinning the same point over and over. And I'll try to focus on highlighting things that others haven't highlighted already. And there are quite a few things that I want to mention. But I will at least try to cover most of the important game design areas of the game. And with that said, let's jump in. Irashaimase! Let's start with the best quality of D4. And that is the visuals. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because everybody is in agreement on this, but the game is absolutely gorgeous. The level of detail that the D4 graphic designers have gone into is just truly impressive. I found myself in multiple points during my playthrough just zooming in on my character or on something else inside the game just to take a closer look, because it's truly awe-inspiring. You can see the skills are great, they pack a punch with them, they're really visually animated quite well, sound design is great as well. There are a few points in the game where you can step on these little glyphs and activate them, and then the camera just pans out and shows you this grand view of a building or a chasm. It's just really amazing and really well done. 10 out of 10 on the visuals for this game. Next, let's talk about the user interface, and this one has also been beaten to death. Pretty much every reviewer is in agreement that it's god-awful, so it needs to get improved quite a bit. So I'm not going to talk about it again too much, because I don't want to be beating this dead horse. I'll just mention the one thing that infuriated me over and over again, and that is the map layout. There is no way for me to put the map underneath my character and make it transparent almost completely, just so I can orient myself on where I am on the map, but at the same time continue journeying. I have to look at the top right perhaps, but then that map is so incredibly tiny, you can't do much with it. So I find myself constantly clicking tab, and I'll show you a gameplay video as well, where I'm just walking, clicking somewhere and tabbing while at the same time trying to keep my character away from dying or just dodging enemies. It is just a really, really bad experience. To me, this should be one of the top priorities for Blizzard to fix, because this has been a staple for ARPGs for the last 20 years plus. Like, there is no excuse that this is not part of the game right now, to me. So hopefully somebody from Blizzard is listening and they address this ASAP, because this is not something that requires massive amount of resources in my mind. It should be something that is doable before launch. But yeah, that's my biggest gripe. I really hope they fix that one, because it is truly immersion breaking, trying to just tab while you're walking your character. That's it for the UI. And how about how zoomed in the game is? A lot of people have noticed that the game just feels a little bit too zoomed in close to your character, and your screen doesn't seem to cover as much ground as it should. But one thing to note is that the game actually slightly zooms in when you go into a city. Check this out. You can clearly notice that you're more zoomed in the city. So when you're in the city, yeah, you're definitely going to feel like your screen doesn't cover anything. You know, it might as well be over here. Outside of the city, it's a little bit better, but still a little bit zoomed in. However, I don't think this is going to be changing.
For you.
Oh, thank you, Maltorius. I don't think this is going to be changing just because many people have pointed out that ranged characters already have an advantage over melee characters. Plenty of enemies kite you, and incredibly well at that as well. So being a barbarian is not easy in this game. But now imagine that the camera is a little bit more zoomed out. Ranged characters are going to have an even bigger advantage. They're going to be able to outrange you even further and just kill enemies like 2 screens away instead of 1 screen away. I don't know if you saw the Crypt video where he was talking about how he was fighting a Shava from 2 screens away while playing Hearthstone Battlegrounds at the exact same time. So it's just super trivial. You just click Hydra every now and then. So now imagine the game is zoomed out like that permanently. A barbarian, yeah, it doesn't help you that you can see the monster from 2 miles away. You still got to close that distance and blow it up. Whereas with a sorcerer, yeah, I'll just pop a Hydra over there. Or, you know, do anything else that blows up monsters from 3 screens away. So it could be that the zooming in of the screen is actually a class balancing choice by Blizzard. And either way, I don't see it changing. And for what it matters, I think it's alright. Outside of town, it's alright. I do agree though that in town, I would like to see it zoomed out a little bit more. This feels silly, you know. I don't see the reason for it to zoom in when you go into town. Now let's cover the open world and questing in general. I kind of enjoy the open world. You know, it's not a very much of a Diablo thing, but I think if it's executed well. We'll see how mounts work and how easy it is to traverse the whole world. I assume waypoints will be something you can just teleport from one end to the other. So hopefully they don't go the MMO route where you have to, on your horse, physically traverse from the top end to the bottom end of the world map. That is just an awful gaming experience in my mind. And it doesn't look like they're going that route. So thank you, Blizzard. Well done. So yeah, I'd give the open world a thumbs up. In terms of dungeons, what we saw in the beta from a dungeon perspective was not implemented very well. They don't feel great. The conditions that you need to meet to progress in each dungeon are not really well thought out. I really hope they put a lot more resources into that. And if not for release, I'm sure it's going to be improved quite a bit over the first 3 to 6 months of the game coming out, because literally everybody had quite a bit of critique for the dungeon system in the beta. So I think Blizzard are smart and they listen, and we'll see where that leads. And now let's go over the skill system. And to me, there are 2 components to this. One is this skill tree right here, and the other one is the Paragon skill tree, which we haven't unlocked in the beta. And I'll try to cover both, but starting with the skill tree, this is what it looks like. You start with some basic skills, which don't do any damage in the case of Barbarian. And then you have some core skills. And in order to unlock these core skills, you have to invest a certain number of points into your basic skill tree. And then going down the tree, you have defensive. Again, in order to unlock them, you have to spend a certain number of points in the prior components. And again, same thing with brawling, which have some mobility skills as well as damage amp skills and utility / damage ones. Then weapon mastery and ultimate skills. And for each node of skills, you have to have spent a certain number of points in the prior nodes. To me, that is not really good design. It forces you to spend skill points and it reduces creativity. It just forces you down this linear path where you don't really have a choice but to spend a bunch of points in basic skills. What if you want to run a build without any basic skills? Then you have 2 points wasted because it takes 2 points to unlock core skills. What if you want to run a build where you're just supporting your allies and you're not really right-clicking? Then you really don't want any core or any basic skills. Likely. It's just this kind of skill system design reduces creativity and reduces options, and it leads you down a very just handheld, limited path. So from that perspective, I'm not a fan. Second, each skill has really no choice attached to it. Let's take Hammer of the Ancients. You have one upgrade for it, which gives you more fury generation, and then a choice of 2 upgrades. And that is really not much of a choice. One of these is always going to be better for the type of build that you're running. And so there is no room for creativity. Builds are going to get figured out, at least in this tree, very early on in the game. You already saw that with the beta. By the end of 2-3 days of the beta, I think there was quite a bit of min-maxing done, and a lot of the strongest builds were rearing their heads. Now obviously there's going to be a bunch of patches and a bunch of percent damage adjustments that Blizzard are going to do over the next few days. But even then, as soon as the real game comes out, within a week, I think this tree is going to be more or less solved for each type of playstyle that you're going to be running. So I don't think this tree creates any depth whatsoever with regards to build creation. However, the Paragon skill tree, from everything that we've seen, I think will be where depth comes from. And that is because there will be different attribute requirements to attain certain Paragon skill tree bonuses, and you get plenty of choices in which Paragon skill tree kind of tiles you pick up and utilize, and even within each tile where you go, which nodes you pick up, how you apply those amplifying squares or whatever they are. That's where you'll get the depth in this game. So I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping that the Paragon skill tree salvages the simplicity and shallowness of this skill tree. Other than that, I can't really speak too much about the Paragon skill tree because we have very limited information, and quite frankly, it could have been completely reworked. Let's hope that's not the case though, because it did look kind of cool and kind of like you could create some cool builds with it. And that kind of skill tree, I don't think will get figured out until, potentially months into the game. And so that's what I get excited about. Making my own builds that are unique, that there's a certain set of skills that you combine together, or skill choices that create this special interaction that makes everything work together. So I think the Paragon skill tree will give us that. Let's hope for the best there. So that's it from the skill side. Now let's talk about the itemization. I think Blizzard have taken quite an interesting route with itemization, where legendary items spawn with these unique legendary affixes, as you can see at the bottom in orange. This one giving you a bunch of overpower, damage, and triggering effects. And the way that the itemization works is you can extract that legendary power, or aspect as it's called, and then it becomes an item of its own. An item that you can fuse together with a different rare or a different legendary, replacing that legendary's already existing aspect with the new one. I think that's quite interesting. I think that makes it easier to target and to spec into the build that you want to spec into, because it always hurts when you get the perfect legendary roll, but the rest of the affixes are absolute trash. Then you can't really use that. So it's going to make the item hunt slightly easier, being able to interchange these aspects from one item to another. Other than that, you can re-roll your affixes, kind of like D3. It's very similar. You can put gems in sockets, same as D3 really. So no surprises there. One thing I want to mention though is some of the affixes are really lackluster at the low levels. Like there's attack speed in gloves, and I don't have it in this one, but like it spawns between, I don't know, 1.5% and 3%. Just some ridiculously low numbers. And I think the reason they have it so low is because it kind of ramps up as you get to the late game. But early game, like 1.5% attack speed is absolute trash. So I think maybe if they can fine tune the ramping and make it a little bit more gradual and Maybe you can get 5% attack speed early on in the game and 7, 8, 10% late game. I don't know exactly how it works right now, but it just feels like you see 1.5% of really whatever it is and you're like, okay, yeah, sure, 1.5%. Because early on in the game, just upgrading your item with these item powers, just leveling up a couple of times and picking up a new item, that is already going to be 2, 3, 5% stronger. So having things that give you 2% attack speed is not helpful. If we can upgrade some of these affixes, especially in the early game, I think it will be good. But other than that, I do appreciate the itemization and what Blizzard are going for with this game. And now let's talk about the unique class mechanics and class balance. And this is really fun to think about in Theorycraft and project into the future how it's going to be in the final game. But this one, I gotta warn you ahead of time, it's going to be heavily focused on the Barbarian. So if you're interested in the Barb, listen in because I think I have some good insight for you. And so before we get started on that, we have to take a bigger picture and go over how builds work and how character optimization works in RPGs in general. We can generalize it in a way where you can think of the skill system, so like the skill tree and even the Paragon tree. That is one aspect of making a build, and the other one is the itemization. Skills, on one hand, are very deterministic, meaning that they're player choice based, and there's no randomness to them. You don't need to farm anything. You just click on Frenzy, and you put exactly 1 point in Frenzy, and you put exactly 1 point in these bonuses. You know exactly what you're gonna get. So if you know the optimal build for a certain class, you're always going to get the exact same thing out of a skill tree. Same with the Paragon skill tree, assuming that there isn't too much randomness with those. I don't know exactly how they work yet, but I imagine you just have to farm them, and as soon as you farmed all 50 of them or whatever, however many there are, you can spec into the exact same build that you see in a build guide somewhere. The only little bit of determinism is again coming from the item side, where there's items that give you +1 all skills. So for example, Rallying Cry, if you have +1 to Rallying Cry, you can take out this skill point and use it elsewhere because now this skill is usable just based on your items. But generally speaking, in RPGs, those are the two aspects that you think about. Is one is the skill side, which is deterministic, and the other one is the item side, which is heavily RNG based, and especially depending on the build that you're going for, you might need to farm an extensive period of time in order to acquire all of the affixes exactly as you want them, and all of the legendary aspects exactly as you want them. This new element in D4. And so when you combine those two, one is a deterministic and one is a heavily random element, they mesh really well. They integrate into a deep character customization where there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of build enabling items as well, if they exist in the game, which they do in this D4. You can do a lot with that. However, this is where it gets interesting with the Barbarian. If you look at the Sorcerer and their unique class mechanic, is they essentially unlock upgrades to their skills. So that class mechanic, because it's based around your skills, is entirely deterministic. You can do the exact same thing that Crip is doing with your skills and with your class mechanic. On the other hand, the Barbarian, the class mechanic that they have is they get to wield 3 sets of weapons essentially. You can see I have 1 legendary 2-handed mace, 2 single-handed legendary sword and whatever legendary mace, and then another 2-handed sword. And that essentially adds 2 extra slots for your items. And it makes it such that the Barbarian is a more item-heavy character customization and character optimization problem. And so why do we care about that? Well, I think this is heavily tied to as to why Barbarian felt so weak in the beta. Let me explain why. If you go to the offensive aspects, and these are only the ones that you can farm, essentially, you get a weak version of them, the minimum of the roll, but you can farm them and get them in a deterministic way. But there's a bunch more that you're not seeing here that you can only drop on legendary items or unique items or whatever. In these offensive aspects, have pretty much most of the damage multipliers for skills embedded in them. The defensive ones, as you can imagine, boost your defenses. Resource ones boost resources, etc., etc. Offensive ones boost your DPS. And you can see they can be slotted into amulet, weapons, gloves, and ring. And let's talk about this for a second. Assuming that on average, a legendary aspect can give you, let's say, 1.3 times multiplier on average, and I'm making this up, obviously. We can kind of estimate how much benefit sorcerers get out of their legendary offensive aspects, as well as how much benefit barbarians get. And so let's look at this. If you're a sorcerer, these are going to be not available for you, and you're just going to have one item slot here. And also, these legendary aspects that are offensive, you can see allowed item types: one-handed weapon, two-handed weapon, which power increases by 100%. So essentially, you can count it as 2 item slots, or a factor of 2 is the benefit that you get out of them. And then gloves and amulet, which is a factor of 1.5, and then rings, which there are 2 of. So all in all, if you are a sorcerer, you're going to get 1 two-handed weapon or 2 one-handed weapons. And so that is a factor of, let's say, 2. Plus 1 from gloves, 3. Amulet is 1.5 and rings are 2. So altogether, you have 6.5, let's call it, points of offensive aspects to work with. If you're going to spec every single one of these item slots with offensive aspects, because stacking damage multipliers is how you get insane DPS in ARPGs. So you're going to be wanting to stack these as much as possible. So sorcerers get 6.5 units of this. Barbarians, on the other hand, get an extra 2 units from this dual wielding right here, plus an extra 2 units from the extra two-hander. So barbarians have 10.5 points of offensive aspects to work with. We can also make a safe assumption that you're going to want to use your amulet slot or maybe your ring slot for something else, because some of the defensive bonuses are incredibly powerful. They make or break certain skills. So the amulet slot especially, you can fill with pretty much almost any of these except resource. Those only go in rings. And so the amulet slot is incredibly contested. We can assume that we can take off, let's say, 1.5 points from both sorcerer and barbarian, just because you're going to want to be running some of these other aspects in those other slots. You can also assume that you might want to use either a ring or a glove for something else, because those are good slots as well for defensive or utility or whatever other purposes. So for argument's sake, let's say we reduce those points from whatever they were for sorcerer and barbarian by 2.5 units. So now all of a sudden sorcerer is left with 4 units of offensive aspects and barbarian is left with 8 units of offensive aspects. And if we go with the assumption that each unit boosts your DPS by a factor, a multiplicative factor of 1.3, well, 1.3 to the power of 4 gives you roughly 3, which means your damage is roughly multiplied by 3x. Now, if you take 1.3 to the power of 8, on the other hand, that gives you 8. And so your damage is getting multiplied by 8. So from your itemization and from your unique barbarian skill characteristics of having this arsenal of weapons, you can pretty much boost your DPS by a factor of 2.5 if you align the right multipliers of damage in your skill slots, in your item slots. And I think this is what has led to Barbarian being slightly weaker in the beta. Just based on the class design, Barbarian, well, first of all, because of that bigger multiplier that Barbarians get, that essentially means that I think some of these Barbarian skills have to be a little bit weaker, because late game, they probably get absolutely insane. And so I think there's that going on. And also, Barbarian, just by the design of the class, is more RNG based. And so what that means is Barbarian is going to be weak until you get all of these 8 points of damage multipliers lined up exactly how they should be lined up to optimize your build. And until then, you're going to fall behind sorcerers and other classes. But in the late game, when you get like the completely insane legendary items, and exactly the ones that you need to scale up times 2, times 3, times 5, whatever it is, multiplicative multipliers, you're going to end up with insane DPS. So that's something that I'm going to predict right now is Barbarian is going to be, unfortunately, similarly to Diablo 2, is going to be a bad class to start with because it requires a lot of farming to get the gear that you want. It's an item dependent class. Whereas Sorcerer, and especially given their class mechanic of upgrading your skills for free as soon as you complete your quest, Sorcerer is going to be a really good class to start with. So if you're thinking of starting Barbarian, keep this in mind. The other prediction I'm going to make is, given how some of these offensive bonuses work, a lot of them are based around building up something. They're based around a certain condition that has to be met before you get that bonus. And so imagine you're running like 4 or 5 of these. You have to meet all 4 or 5 conditions before you can get your insane DPS. And I think that's going to lead to the Barbarian becoming a class that works around the cycle, around the timing, which can take quite a long period. You might take like a minute to build up all of your requirements to hit that insane DPS. And so because of that, I think my prediction is Barbarian is going to be a class that excels at killing bosses and dealing damage to bosses, and maybe struggling a little bit with trash mobs, whereas sorcerers and other classes will be able to better deal with large mobs. So if you're thinking of running Barbarian, make sure to pair up with another class that will clean up the trash for you so that you can shine when you get to the boss and deal your one-hit kills on every single boss. We've already seen some silly numbers coming out of the beta with like 30k, no crit, no overpower hits, stuff like that. But again, that's based around quite a significant timing and investment in building up those resources that make that single hit so large. But having said all that, what do I think in terms of these class mechanics? They certainly make the classes very unique. I don't think Barbarian will be as bad as in D2, where you literally cannot start a season with Barbarian in D2. You have to start some other class and farm up the items to gear up a Barbarian. But overall in D4, I think Barbarian is definitely a viable class to start with. However, it will require some decent knowledge of how to best itemize to take advantage of damage multipliers that are going to be available to you. Yeah, it might be not very noob friendly from that perspective. Not from the perspective of executing your skills, you know, the right combo per se, just from knowing which legendary aspects to combine. And just to touch on the Necro maybe and the Rogue unique class design aspects, it kind of seems like they're similar to the Sorcerer ones, where you just make a choice, very deterministic choice early on, and yeah, it just gives you a bonus. There's a little randomness attached to those class mechanics, so I think they'll function similarly to Sorcerer, where you can choose your benefits and reap the advantage right away. And they're quite dynamic too, where you can adjust some of them mid-combat, and that's pretty cool, I think. And I don't actually know what the Druid class mechanic is, so I'm not going to comment on that one. But overall, I appreciate the class uniqueness in this game. Every single class has their own aspects, their own mechanics. The skills are very different. I don't think they're leveraging too many of the sprites from one skill to another across different classes. So I think they've done a really good job with that as well. And so what is my final verdict for D4? Honestly, the game in its current state is really well done, and you have this incredible sense of exploration as you go through the game, both of exploring the world and the design and the imagery that Blizzard have built into it, and as well as the exploring the skill systems and item systems and everything else that Blizzard has set up. It's quite exciting for me. And I think that's true for a lot of new games that you end up starting up and seeing how everything works. It's always extremely exciting. But I think D4 has really done a special job with that. Just the world design is phenomenal. So I'll definitely be enjoying it for the first few months. And whether or not I'll be enjoying it afterwards is going to be a function of how well Blizzard has executed on the end game. And in regards to that, I think the game has a really high potential. The ceiling for this game in regards to what kind of systems they can implement and complexities and everything else is, in my mind, super high. It's just a matter of whether they're going to listen to some of the feedback with regards to, let's say, dungeons and how fun they are and other things that, you know, everybody else has covered already and we talked a little bit about in this video. If Blizzard addresses some of the larger problems with the game, I think this game can truly be phenomenal and something we can enjoy for years to come. But whether it is that already, we'll see. I'm coming from a Last Epoch background, and I've played that game for quite a few years on and off. And every time there's a patch, I come back. We'll see whether Diablo is the same thing. It might be that early on the end game is not very well executed, in which case 2 or 3 months after release, we'll just have to take a break and then go back into it when they release some patches that improve that end game. But from my current standpoint, I think the game is a 7.5 out of 10, let's say. And it has the potential easily to be 9, 9.5, even a 10 out of 10. And we have to keep in mind that this game is not going to be designed in a similar way like D2 was 25 or 20 years ago. You know, gone are the days where you release a game and you just patch every now and then you release an expansion, and that's how you add content to your game. This game is going to be with the new gaming as a service business model. So there should be content and upgrades and updates being released constantly. There should be a very active dev team and community managers following every feedback that everybody posts and stuff like that. That should give the game much greater longevity. Just think about how D3 was revived after such an abysmal launch and so many problems with the systems in the game and just a really unpleasant endgame experience. The expansion added a lot of improvements, and then over time, the way that they implemented seasons and just adding fun little things to every new season, that brought back a lot of players back into the game. D4 is going to have something similar, I guarantee you. There will be seasons and there will be special new little things to explore and to try out with every single season. I'm looking forward to it. So we will be playing Diablo 4 together in June. We'll see. I hope we can do some community stuff as well together on stream. And with that said, if you like this video or if you're interested in Last Epoch and Diablo 4 content, follow me on YouTube and on Twitch. You can see them in the description of the video below. And as a quick reminder, if you're a fan of Last Epoch, we are doing a 9-hour stream on Sunday, April 2nd, where we'll be doing, together with the community, a bunch of build optimizations. So it's going to be fun. Please tune in. And with that said, thank you. I hope you enjoyed D4. And that's it for me. Gochiso sama deshita.